This homework is related to language in Othello, a study of word appearances. You just take a look at this graph. It indicates all the different appearances of these keywords. Okay, so you can see that love is included the most out of these selections, and black the least, with everything else in between. So your task is to answer the following questions. The first is, how far do you think thought is corrupted by language in Othello? George Orwell's quote is, "But if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought." Have a think about this quote and what you think George Orwell means. I think we can easily say that Othello is corrupted by language, and his thoughts are corrupted by Iago's language. Do you think they're corrupted by anyone else's language? Have a think about the instances where this happens, and gather some quotes of where you think Othello's thoughts are corrupted by language. However, it isn't just his thoughts that are corrupted. Have a think about who else becomes corrupted by other people's language or their own. Okay, the second thing you need to consider is in what situations are each of these characters in control of their language? Othello, Desdemona, and Iago. There are typical situations throughout the play where each of these characters are totally in control of their language, what they're saying, and how they're saying it, and what impact it might have. So have a think about the situations in which each of these characters are in control of their language. So Othello, Desdemona, and Iago. Try to gather a couple of examples for each. The next consideration is heaven versus hell. The graph indicates that heaven appears in the play more times than hell does. Why do you think this is? Come up with some reasoning behind it, because really there are terribly evil actions that happen in the play. It's a tragedy, so should be associated with a lot more hell, yet there's far more occurrences of the word heaven. Okay, so just come up with a justification as to why that might be. Your next question is about knowledge, and knowledge being power. So knowledge is really key to Othello. I want you to come up with 3 or 4 events that may have been altered by either a character knowing something that wasn't known at the time, or not knowing something that was known at the time. Okay, so think of 3 or 4 events that would have been changed in some way by the characters knowing or not knowing the particular thing in that situation. Okay, so 3 or 4 examples where you think those events might have been significantly altered by knowing or not knowing. Your next task is again to look at characters, so you're going to look at Othello, Desdemona, Iago, and Emilia. I'd like you to think about what you think each of these characters fears the most. Fear, again, is a word that crops up quite a lot in Othello. Okay, so fear is quite central to a lot of the events and occurrences. So I want you to think about what each of those characters fears the most. Othello, Desdemona, Iago, and Emilia. Okay, next thing I want you to think about, the word fool occurs quite a lot. Okay, probably Iago talking about Othello and Roderigo, suggesting that they're fools because he's able to easily manipulate them. But I'd like you to think about in what ways you think Desdemona is a fool. In what ways does she act in a foolish way? Okay, so I'd like you to think of a few occurrences for where you think she comes across as being a fool. Okay, or that she's done something foolish. Okay, an interesting one here. The word bed appears a surprising 22 times in the play. Why do you think this is? I just want you to come up with a reason as to why you think the word bed appears so many times in Othello and what significance that might have. Okay, true versus false. These oppositions are prevalent throughout Othello. So true appears more times than false does. How do you think things would have been different in the play if false had been uttered more frequently? Okay, so mainly think about Othello and his belief in what Iago's telling him. He obviously uses the word true more often, or perhaps Iago does. But how do you think things might have been different in the play if false had been uttered more frequently? Okay, last two things to consider. Love. What can be said about love appearing a crazy 78 times in the play? Love is obviously significant throughout for various reasons. How much do you think it has to do with the events that occur and how the characters change, develop, fall, grow in power, all that kind of thing? What do you think is the part love has to play in the play? Okay, final question. What do you think? The word think is used 31 times, whilst no is used 66 times. So more than twice as many times. Okay? If there was more thinking and less knowing, what might have changed? Okay, so if the characters had thought rather than known, what might have changed in the play? Okay, so again, you've got the choice. Submit your responses via the blog, just reply to the post, or bring your responses into the lesson. Okay, I enjoy reading your responses to those questions.